Welcome to Africa Geotrends, your window into Africa's power, progress, and geopolitics. Asterisk before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the stories shaping Africa's future. Beneath the soil of Africa lies one of the greatest concentrations of strategic wealth on Earth. Over 30% of the world's mineral reserves, over 90% of platinum group metals, more than 70% of global cobalt, and vast deposits of gold, lithium, manganese, rare earth elements, natural gas, and critical industrial metals that power the modern world. For centuries, these resources fueled global empires while Africa remained locked at the bottom of the value chain. But today, something is shifting. Across the continent, governments, engineers, economists, and industries are asking a dangerous question. Should Africa continue exporting raw materials, or should it begin refining, processing, and creating its own industrial power? This is not just economics. This is sovereignty. Africa's mineral export system did not develop naturally. It was engineered during colonial rule, when territories were shaped into extraction zones rather than manufacturing centers. Railways were built from mines to ports, not between African nations. Roads, shipping routes, and financial systems were designed to move wealth outward, not circulate value within the continent. When African nations gained independence, they inherited this structure almost intact. Even today, over 85% of Africa's mineral exports leave the continent in raw or semi-processed form. The Democratic Republic of Congo produces more than 70% of the world's cobalt, a critical mineral for batteries used in electric vehicles, smartphones, and renewable energy storage. Yet less than 5% of this cobalt is refined inside Africa. Most of it is processed abroad and sold back to African countries as finished products. Africa exports cheap and imports expensive. This same pattern has repeated with gold, oil, lithium, copper, and bauxite. But now African countries are starting to challenge it. Lithium, known as white gold, has become one of the most demanded resources of the 21st century. The global push for electric vehicles and clean energy storage has dramatically increased its value. Countries like Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mali, and the Democratic Republic of Congo have discovered major lithium reserves. Mining companies rushed in with fast extraction deals. But some African governments decided to shift the rules. Zimbabwe placed restrictions on raw lithium exports, requiring local processing before shipment. The reason was simple. Instead of earning a few $100s per ton from raw concentrate, refined lithium products can be worth several $1,000s per ton. Namibia followed with similar beneficiation policies. These decisions were risky. Some investors resisted. Others threatened to pull out. But the message was clear. Africa wants more than extraction. It wants value. This is happening at a time of global demand shock. Demand for lithium is expected to increase more than 500% by 2040. Cobalt demand may triple. Copper demand is expected to double. Rare earth demand continues to climb as clean energy, defense, and digital technologies expand. Africa sits at the center of this supply web, making its resources more valuable and more contested than ever before. The United States, China, Europe, the Middle East, and emerging Asian economies are competing for access. But Africa is beginning to understand that selling faster does not necessarily mean earning more. In many cases, it means losing long-term power. Building refining capacity is not simple. It requires massive investment, advanced technology, reliable energy supply, skilled labor, transport infrastructure, and stable governance. Processing lithium, smelting copper, refining bauxite into alumina, or separating rare earths demands industrial ecosystems that take years to develop. Many African countries still struggle with electricity shortages, logistics problems, and capital constraints. This creates a hard dilemma. Continue exporting raw materials for quick income, or invest heavily in local processing and wait for long-term gains. Some governments are attempting a balance, allowing exports while gradually developing domestic capacity. Botswana provides a real example of how this transition can work. For years, it exported unprocessed diamonds. But through strategic renegotiation with De Beers, it succeeded in building local diamond sorting, cutting, and marketing capacity. Today, Botswana hosts one of the world's major diamond processing hubs. It created jobs, boosted skills, increased revenue, and prove that African countries can move up the value chain if policies are consistent and negotiations are firm. Ghana, Africa's largest gold producer, is expanding its domestic gold refinery capacity. Nigeria has invested in refining, most visibly with the Dangote refinery, one of the largest in the world, designed to process up to 650,000 barrels of oil per day, reducing dependence on imported fuel. Guinea, which holds the world's largest bauxite reserves, is pushing for local alumina refining instead of exporting raw bauxite to foreign smelters. These moves represent a shift from an extraction economy to a processing economy. But resource sovereignty is not just about what happens inside national borders. It is also about how African countries work together. One of Africa's biggest weaknesses has been low inter-African trade. Only around 15% of African trade happens within the continent, compared to over 60% in Europe and more than 40% in Asia. This is where the African Continental Free Trade Area becomes vital. With most African countries participating, it creates the largest free trade area in the world by number of nations. Its goal is to reduce trade barriers, strengthen regional industries, and allow African nations to trade more with each other instead of relying on distant external markets. Imagine lithium mined in Zimbabwe, refined in Namibia, battery components produced in South Africa, final battery assembly completed in Kenya, and electric buses deployed across West Africa. This is not science fiction. This is the long-term strategy African policymakers and industrial planners are working toward. Regional value chains could keep more wealth inside the continent, create skilled employment, and reduce dependency on external supply systems. Resource sovereignty also shifts power. When countries control processing, they gain leverage in trade negotiations, global partnerships, and political relationships. History shows that nations controlling strategic materials influence global systems. Saudi Arabia used oil to shape global energy politics. China used rare earth dominance to strengthen its industrial position. Africa now has similar potential in battery minerals and green energy resources. But control must be guided carefully. Without strong institutions, local processing can lead to corruption, environmental damage, or elite capture. There is also global resistance. Some foreign governments and corporations argue that African export controls disrupt global supply chains and increase costs. Others claim African countries lack the technical ability to manage large-scale refining. Similar arguments were once used against industrializing countries in East Asia. No nation has ever achieved high living standards by exporting raw materials forever. Industrialization always involves temporary hardship and resistance. At the same time, a new African generation is emerging. Africa is the youngest continent. By 2050, more than 1 billion Africans will be under 25. This generation is digitally connected, increasingly educated, and more aware of global economic systems than any before it. Across Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, Ghana, Rwanda, and South Africa, young engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs are building startups in mining technology, renewable energy, battery production, material science, and industrial logistics. Universities are strengthening engineering and mineral processing programs. Partnerships with Asian and European institutions are expanding. A new technical class is emerging. This shift is happening alongside Africa's growing role in multipolar global politics. The world is no longer dominated by one power. Instead, multiple powers are competing for resources, markets, and influence. Africa, instead of being locked to a single bloc, is diversifying its partnerships. While China remains a major partner, African countries are also engaging more with the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, Europe, and the Americas. This diversification gives Africa strategic leverage. No single power controls the relationship anymore. But challenges remain. Infrastructure gaps, power shortages, political instability in some regions, and global economic shocks can slow progress. Environmental concerns must be addressed as extraction and refining expand. Value addition must translate into real benefits for ordinary people, not just political elites and multinational partners. Without transparency, institutions, and fair distribution, resource sovereignty risks becoming another form of centralized control. Africa now stands at a crossroads. One path continues the old model. Export raw resources, import finished goods, remain dependent. The other path is more difficult. Invest in processing, strengthen inter-African trade, build regional industries, and retain more value. The second path requires discipline, long-term planning, and cooperation across borders. The world's clean energy transition depends on African minerals. Electric vehicles, renewable grids, battery storage systems, and future technologies rely on resources extracted from African soil. This gives Africa historical leverage. How Africa chooses to use it will shape not only its own future, but the structure of the global economy for decades. This is not just an economic adjustment. It is the rewriting of global trade and power flows. For the first time in modern history, Africa is not just a supplier of raw input for other people's progress. It is becoming a decision-maker in how global industry is built. The question now is not whether Africa has the resources. It is whether Africa will control their transformation. And for the first time in generations, the answer is no longer obvious. You've been watching Africa Geo Trends, where Africa's moves shape the world. If you haven't already, subscribe now and stay ahead of the next big story.